I have the pleasure of asking Dr. Rukmini Banerji, our second keynote speaker, to come join us here. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham Education Foundation and has been the godmother of the People's Action for Learning Network. She was director of Asar Center, trained as an economist, and really it is so difficult to describe Rukmini because you can say something for her now, but she's moved on. All of us are dying to hear what Rukmini has to say, especially after what Lant had to say.
I'm not sure I should say thank you to Lant, but nothing has changed. In fact, things have gotten worse. And I think there could be no better way to start this conference than to think of the red dotted line at the bottom of Lant's last slide. But before I go there, I want to just say namaste, namaskar, salam alaikum. It's a great pleasure. We couldn't even attend the last conference, which didn't happen because of all kinds of problems. And so the fact that we are here, I think, is a huge accomplishment. As I was sitting on the stage when the minister was here and Rajiv was talking about his childhood, which is far more recent than my childhood, I was also thinking about my childhood. We had something that looked similar to this. I think many of you, at least who are my generation and from my part of the world, where we put all the, to call it a bed is going too far, we call it chowki, little wooden things that we sleep on together in your grandmother's house to do a performance. And it looks kind of like this. This is a nicer version because it's a fancy hotel, but it looks like this. And if you were going to perform on it and do a dance, you were very careful not to step on the cracks because you might go through. And so I'm very happy to be here. We've come a long way since those red chowkis on which we had to do little dances. But nothing has changed in the world and we're still on the red line. And so I would say that Lant has given us two major challenges. I'm going to move this because it's a bit too much on the precipice here. One is, I think he is saying very politely, which is very unlike Lant, who are you and how are you different? You started off by being different, and are you still different? And I think that's a very important question, at least for the PAL network core members to really think. Having been, along with many of my colleagues from India, right there from before the birth of all of this, I naturally feel very strongly about who we are. That could be just our view, but I'd like to share that view with all of you and remind many people in this audience about where we began and why we began. I think number one, we began on the ground. We began where the problem was. And I can say that at least from my colleagues and me from Pratham, at some point 20 years ago, we stopped doing whatever we were doing in education and felt we had to completely do a controlled alt reboot and start again. We could see kids having difficulties, but we were not able to adequately deal with it. And I think that's the birth of a lot of things that at least we were doing today. And one of the key issues at that point was trying to understand the core of the problem and trying to understand it in a way that not just you and I understood it, but the families of the children understood it, the neighbors understood it, and people who interacted with the children understood it. And so I think that our learning path and our growing path has been quite different from many other traditional ways in which education has expanded. I remember many years ago, when my hair was not white, being in a village. This was the early days of this trying to figure it out. And we were asking kids to read. And there was this lady in the village, an old lady, a grandma, who called me and she said, "What are you doing?" And in true arrogance of people who, think that they know what they're doing, I said, "I'm doing a survey." And she started laughing. And I've never forgotten her laugh or her look. She was illiterate. She was probably a great-grandmother. And she laughed and she said, "You're not doing a survey." And her laugh indicated you didn't even know what you're doing, and you're doing it. And so I had to stop because I mean, I thought I knew kind of what I was doing, but I couldn't articulate it to her. And she smiled again and she said, "You are doing something really important." So a survey is not important. Research is not important. What is important is what you're doing. And what you're doing is important because usually you people come from outside and you don't know, and we have to tell you, which is the definition of a survey. People who don't know come, they ask questions to people on the ground who tell them, and then they put it together in some nice report and release it. So, but this is different because what you are doing, you don't know, we don't know, and we are figuring it out together. And to me, that has always remained. Often people ask us, "Are you doing research?" And I usually say no, for this reason. We often don't get funded to be a think tank because what we are doing apparently is not thinking, because the doing is way more important. And I think some of these things have to stay with us because that is where we started. We started doing this because we needed to figure out at the core what was the problem. We needed to do it in a way that my grandmother could understand it. Actually, she understood it well before I did. And we needed to do it in a way that people could feel the problem and want to do something about it. This is, as I think Lant very evocatively said, this is not somebody else's problem. This is our problem. And therefore, giving the problem a name and a picture that everybody can resonate with is really important. I worry when things become alphabets. I worry when they become numbers. A huge problem like this, which is holding up the whole world, cannot be called SDG 4.1.3.5. Because then it's very difficult to relate to that problem. If we go to the next slide, this is what we are all about. We are not about a neat and tidy pen and paper, let's do this data collection, let us put it in a report, let's publish it, let's have an inauguration. This is what we are about, and this thing may look different in different countries, but the core of it is the same, that what we are doing is we are doing something really important to get to the core of what our children need. We didn't learn this by going to conferences. We have to remember this. I have nothing against conferences, but we didn't learn it by going to conferences. We learned it by visiting each other in the field. And thanks to being part of this great family, I've had the opportunity, as have many of my colleagues, to go to, let's say, a madrasa in Senegal, to go to a village in Uganda. We've had the pleasure of having people from different parts of the world come and visit us in our villages. And I think that's how we learned. We learned from experiencing each other's experiences. And those experiences were dirty, they were dusty. I remember with early professor from Tanzania, we sat on a string cot in a village in UP in India. The string cot broke and we both fell down. And I think we learned many things. We didn't just learn about reading and math. We didn't just learn about what children can do or not do. I think underlying all of this, at least I learned a lot about what does democracy mean, what does it really mean to have opportunity, and how slow we are really to make these kinds of things available for all our children. And so I think we should remember that our ways of learning have been different, our ways of growing have been different. We didn't go to London and New York and Paris to learn these things. We learned it by crossing difficult oceans. We have borders that are very difficult to cross, and yet after 10 years, despite all of this, we have been together. So we are different. Hopefully land and our identity will remain. We took from each other voluntarily and we gave to each other voluntarily. Nobody told us you have to be in a particular framework. We took what suited us from each other for our own needs on the ground and we adapted it. I think large parts of agriculture have moved like this. Nobody did a framework to see that you have to fit into this. And you took what made sense for you to take for your family, for your neighborhood, and for your country. Today, if we are moving towards a common assessment as part of what we do, it's because we together have decided that may make sense to do today. So I think the translatability, the flexibility has been very important. This is a completely different global model from the global models that dominate us today. And I think we have to be mindful of that. This is a voluntary coming together of people. In our people group, there are all kinds of people. There are people who are proper professors, like Felipe and Samana, like Professor Abdu, like, well, Willema is a professor also, Sarah. But there are also people who have nothing to do with universities. I, for example, am never called in India to speak in a university because what we do is not research and it is not high level. It is very ground level. And so we are a collection of people who are very varied, but who are held together because the common core of what we believe is very strong. And I think that this diversity has to remain because it brings into it a whole set of other energies. The problem is, our problem is really important because the solutions, and I think that one of the wonderful things about Land is that he can put on a picture on the stage things that perhaps are much more difficult to explain, that your yellow line and your red line almost have to be animated, because I think what it does is really tell you that completely you're on the wrong path. And while we have not improved, and while I think a lot of things that we are doing is just getting worse, it's still important to be reminded that that's in a different space than where we think or where the world thinks we are going. I think together, the PAL network, the members, we have at least ensured that the way we do things is recognized somewhere in the world. I remember a conference in Washington, Sarah may remember it as well, where the World Bank actually gave us space, and maybe I don't know if I should call it the World Bank, or I should say it was Beth King, who actually gave us space to Sarah and me, who, as you can see, we are very colorful in many different ways, to sit in a room where everybody else was what I would call men in black. These were the PISA, the TIMS, the Pearls, the people who have controlled what is called assessment in the world, and they were not particularly happy that there was a viewpoint like ours that was being given so much space in that setting. And the space that we were getting was on very many key issues. The space that we were getting or we were taking was to say it is senseless to do a pen and paper test when children cannot read. It is completely unethical to do that. And hence when I see this big push to do PISA all over the world, it just amazes me that people don't see the ethical side of this. That if you have children, now I see it from landslide in Indonesia. We are used to that in India or in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, to say there are kids who have finished 8 years of school and there is still 25–30% who cannot read. To ask them to do a pen and paper test is absolutely unethical. And before I get much older, I'm going to take a case to the International Court of Justice against PISA, because I think that this is destroying many, many things that really need to be done. Rather than showing that you are only at one end of the distribution, I think the entire enterprise, if you really want to help children and you want to help them in a meaningful way, is almost wrong. So what to measure and how to measure is not just assessment. I think there are very many very important principles below it, which are fundamentally based on what do you think is democracy, how do you think young people will have adequate opportunity to even achieve a bare minimum, and what is ethical for the world to do. There is large amounts of money in the world being spent on education. And I think it's high time to think that if the real line is that red line, is that money being spent in any way that is useful? I think there are ethical questions there as well. So I would say that in our whole family, in the way that we have evolved over 10 years, we are different. We need to continue to be different. These are not easy conversations to have. I remember in 2 or 3 different ways that this process, whether it's in the ground level or on the high level, cannot be smooth. And I worry sometimes when things look too easy, it means you've lost the edge. Because this is whatever, Land has much nicer words, disruptive, insurgency, whatever it is, it's when you hit against something which is very solid that you feel the pressure. If you're smoothly going through, it means there is something that you're not really, big change is not happening. At the ground level, I remember this incident where there was this man, he had 3 sons, and again, we were in a village and we were going house to house, and I went to his house, And he looked at me very disdainfully with my little Asar tool, which everybody knows, but we should still see it, put on the next one. And when I showed this tool to him, then no, go back. He looked at it and said, give it, his 3 sons went to private school. This is in UP. He looked at it very disdainfully and said, show this to the children, the poor children who go to government schools. So we said, we will. We are going to everyone's house, but how about we ask your sons to do it? I remember still, it was afternoon, he was lying down. The first son was in, I think, 3rd grade. He came up to about the letter level. And so the man got up a little bit on his elbow and he said, oh, well, he's still too young. You know, that's why he can't do it. The next son was in 5th grade, did not move beyond the word level. This is a man who is sending all his 3 children to private school, paying, you know, maybe not high fees, but certainly paying fees. When the kid in 5th standard couldn't read it, he sort of sat up. He did not let me test his older kid who was in 7th, because by this time he was on his feet. And I think he was very disturbed because he didn't know whether he should go and start, you know, slapping the teachers, or whether it's himself that he should slap. So I think it's disturbing at your personal level that you've actually thought you're doing the best you can for your children, and it's simply not good enough. And I think that's what countries need to feel, that you're doing the best, but it's not going anywhere, and hence something totally different needs to be done. When the 1st or 2nd or maybe the 3rd Asar report came back in India, and for those who know about our history, it's still a very contested exercise. There are many parts of the government who still don't like it at all. And I remember again being in the office of our biggest state, UP, and talking to the head bureaucrat. And as we were talking, because UP shows up very poorly in the Asar results, he picked up the phone and he called his counterpart in Tamil Nadu, which is a very advanced state. And he said, and I could only hear this part of the conversation, he picked up the phone and he said, have you seen the Asar report? Either this report is completely rubbish, they don't know what they're doing, but if that is not the case, then we need to stop doing what we are doing and really rethink. And his point was that the entire country is following some theory of change, some logical pathway to doing what is best in education. You get all your teachers in place, you get the schools built, you get the textbooks on time, you provide midday meals, and you hope for the best. And that's what you know how to do as a big government. Tamil Nadu has done this 20 years ago, and their reading levels look just like UP. And UP thought, maybe UP was not following Finland, it was certainly following Tamil Nadu, that's where we will get to. And here comes out a whole exercise which says it doesn't matter. All of these things don't matter. So it has to be disturbing if you have to redo things and to think differently. And I think that's the push that we need to continue to make. Bela is already waving sheets at me, but I'm going to ignore her for a bit because I haven't come all this way here to just stand here for 2 minutes. So, you know, we are here in Nepal, and I think one of the symbols of Nepal, right, is the sun and the moon, both. And I love it because I think that we are both used to the sun and moon. To me, the assessment part of what we do here at the PAL network or in Pratham is the moon, which maybe shows you, depending on which time you look at the moon, whether it's gloom or doom or shine. And then I think there is a big part which is the sun. And I'm not saying, and I have much more enlightened people in the audience as well as right here who have evidence for what the world can do or not do. But I do think that we as a group that really care about the core problem have a big responsibility towards the sun as well. And I think that, you know, all of this has to be translated, whether on large scale or on small scale, into ways of showing the world that this solution is possible. How that solution then can get into a bigger place may be different. I think it also has to translate into solutions that ordinary people can do. I remember talking to a mother in some part of India, not far from here, where she said that to me, I showed her this tool and I said, tell me where your child is at. Because if at the core of it, a parent cannot relate to this, no policy can come and fall on you and make you change. And she said, I can't tell you because I'm not educated. So I said, look at it as a picture. Tell me what you think your child can do, because your child goes to school, there's stuff that he brings to school and brings back that maybe looks like this. And with great difficulty, she agreed that probably what's on the left is the highest level, and probably those things which are just there on their own are the simplest. So I asked her a question. I said, when your child is sick, what do you do? And she had many things she did. And she could describe them. You know, you put your hand here, if it's hot, you do some things at home, you watch it for a couple of days. If that doesn't improve, then you go to a government clinic. If that doesn't help, you go to a... She had a whole pathway. So I said, do you have a medical degree? Do you have an MBBS? And she said, you're making fun of me again. And I said, I'm not. Because as an uneducated mother, you are taking many informed choices about how to help the health of your child. But as the same mother, why are you not able to do all of those things for your child's education? And I think the reason she doesn't do it is because educated people have told her to stay out. Send your child to my school and I will fix the problem. Because you are not capable of handling your own child's education because you are not educated. Luckily, the health people have not told her that. And therefore, she can engage on the health. A big responsibility of the entire education effort, wherever we are doing it, is to be able to include people, the real people who can help in this problem. And I think just throwing big policies down is not necessarily the only way to do it. Sending them to a building, which is called a school, I think is not necessarily the only way to do it. So I would say that the process of spreading our solution, to me, at least for this group of people, is going to be very similar to the ways in which we have reached a common understanding of the problem. It is going to be a people-to-people infection, and it's going to be a people-to-people inspiration. In India, in Pratham, we look at it in a certain way, and if you can just go to the next slide. This is the way that we talk about the results of the Asar survey or of any measurement. And I'd like to spend a few minutes on this, because this is the simplest way. This is what all of India sees from the village level up to the highest level. And what does it say? What it says is, if you look at grade 5, there is about 50% kids who can read at the second grade level. What should that number be? What should the number be? Come on.
That should be 100%.
This is very lukewarm. What should that number be? 100. What should the number be at the third grade level? 100. I mean, the bottom line is, if that number is not close to 100 on the top right-hand corner, there is no point in doing anything with these kids afterwards. Slide after slide that Land has been publishing says that. And it is very confusing to me why the bigwigs of education, both in countries and in the world, have not woken up to the problem, to the issue that if you have not been able to fix the fact that by the end of third grade, if children are not reading and not doing basic arithmetic, nothing is going to happen to them afterwards. No empowerment, no livelihood, no economic development is possible. And therefore, rather than wasting our time worrying about whether we will be part of PISA and part of something else, this is the problem from household to household, from village to village, from school to school that we need to solve. And frankly, and maybe I'm running out of time because my hair is white, I have no faith that some large bureaucratic system is going to actually be able to solve the problem unless there is some fire under their seat to make them do it. And perhaps where we have failed entirely is not converting this into a political issue where people win and lose elections on this matter. Perhaps that's the only way that on a large scale this will change. So very quickly, I would say that if you are going to change this situation, it means moving an entire distribution to the right. This is a very low level of where we are going. You can call it minimum proficiency. But if we really focus on how to do this, I suspect it will change the entire business of education. This whole thing about how we test kids in higher levels, how we build curriculum, if a whole system and a whole society actually gets down to moving all the numbers to making sure that the right-hand side uppermost cell is close to 100, I think it will change what we call education today. And the more this remains the same, the more likely it is that nothing is ever going to change. In Pratham, we do things a certain way. And I would say that, some of my colleagues will slap me when I get off the stage to say perhaps that's only one of the ways in which to do it. And that is to say that a traditional school system is built by rows. An age and grade is a row, and you plant a certain expected curriculum, which in some countries may be more realistic than others, about what you expect a particular age and a particular grade to do. In our country, that expectation is completely faulty. Whatever you're expecting kids to do has nothing to do with the reality of how we are making them do. And so in Pratham, what we do is we reorganize this grid. Rather than as rows, we organize it in columns, which means that given the existing teachers in a school or in an after-school program or volunteers in a village, it is easier for me to take kids 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, group them temporarily by the level at which they are, and then move them to the next level and the next level. We've been doing this for 20 years, and today we can bring this change. We as Pratham can bring about a change and move kids into that last column in 30 or 40 days, working 2 hours a day. So we have a solution. We have a solution, the solution works, and we've worked at getting it to be as effective as possible. It doesn't need a name. What it needs is the effectiveness at being able to show durably that this problem is not an insoluble problem, and common and ordinary people can solve it. But having demonstrated it, you have to convince many other people that this is the way to go. Because it takes a very fundamental assumption of the education system that you need to organize children by grade and age. By reorganizing them in a different way, you're actually shaking the foundations of how you build school systems across the world. That's not easy. And people resist that because you're used to having your 10-year-old in 5th grade, whatever the 5th grade may mean, and you don't like to be told that your 5th grader today is in this group. The thing about this grouping is, if you are successful, nobody's in a group for more than 10 days. It's not a permanent place where you're going to be for the rest of your life. It's a temporary place. Till you learn how to run, you're going to be walking, and you're going to go walking quite quickly. So I'd like to just end by showing you 1 or 2 more things. If you go to the next one, that in bringing about the solution, there are many steps. But the first step for each one of ourselves is to make sure that we understand the core of the problem, and that my understanding leads me to do the action that's most appropriate. And the action that I do has to be, to me, to myself, very convincing. I need to move my children to be reading, and they should be durably reading, 5 years from now. Because once a kid learns to read, they can even fuel themselves to go further. And then comes the many other things, which are, I think, what Lant was referring to, much trickier. But how do you get larger organizations and larger systems? How do you penetrate those? How do you inhabit those? And what do you change? And all I can say that this is not done, this kind of change is not done through better manuals, better training, or better workshops. I think this needs a whole other kind of exercise. I want to just end by thanking 3 people. One is the immigration officer in the Delhi airport yesterday when I was coming. So he asked me, where are you going? And my family is always perturbed because all kinds of people seem to talk to me about what I'm doing, but they don't talk to the rest of my family. So the immigration guy says, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to a conference in Kathmandu. He said, what's the conference about? I said, it's about primary education. The immigration guy said, all education is primary, because if you don't achieve that primary, you should stop the rest of the education. So I asked him to write a letter to our Prime Minister to say this, because this is very common wisdom. If you don't have your foundation right, don't bother with the rest. The second guy I'm remembering today is somebody who was at the border of India and Pakistan the last time that we could cross over. And Bela was supposed to pick us up, but the car to pick us up hadn't come. So we were sitting in the room of this man who was probably the intelligence guy there. And so he asked me, so what do you do? So I told him what I do, and in Hindi I said, हम कोशिश करते हैं कि बच्चे पढ़ने लगे. We are trying to make sure that children read. So he looked at me very patiently and says, how long have you been trying this? And I said, like Lant did, I've been trying it for the last 20 years. So he gave me a cup of tea and he said, if you haven't succeeded, you should stop, because it's clear that you're not going to succeed. I think these are very important words. But obviously, because I have to end on a good note before your coffee, I had a phone call about 2 months ago from some unknown number. And sometimes I pick up these calls and sometimes I don't. but that day I was bored, so I thought, let me pick it up. It's usually car salesman, insurance, and other such things. But this was a young man who said that he'd been at some talk that I had given. And he was very frank. He said, Madam, you spoke many things, and you speak very fast, so I didn't pick up many things. But I picked up 3 things. And the 3 things were, you need to do something about children's foundational learning. Hallelujah, I'm glad he got that. Number 2, you need to keep it simple. And number 3, you need to do it very quickly because we are running out of time. And even if anybody or anywhere that I speak takes away these 3, I think we've succeeded. It so happens that this young man is today responsible for all of Bombay's schools. And so this is a good thing because there's some hope there that some system change will happen in some form or fashion. But I'd like to just, I keep saying this is a trick, to keep saying I'm ending, so Bela keeps sitting down every time I say this. So I really am ending. I think that I didn't plan this with land. If we had, we would have done a better job together. But the map that you put up, land, of your missionaries and your Catholics and Muslims and whatnot, I think it's an important one. I think that the model or the spirit that we need to take doesn't come from education training programs. It has to come from the way missionaries operate. Because in this job of moving from spreading the understanding of the problem to spreading the power of the solution, you're going to need persistence. You all know that already. You're going to need some unending source of passion, because this is not a simple short business. And finally, I think we're going to need a big chunk of being practical. If a door is open, get into it. Don't worry if the next door is open or not. And 3 things again that we need to keep in mind. Already our hands are doing a good job. We know how to assess, we know how to put it together. Many of us are beginning the first steps of what you do to effective action. But your hands have to be connected to your head. If you don't understand what is the core of the problem, and if you are doing something because somebody gave you a good manual of teacher activities to do, it's not going to make a difference. So what you're doing has to be connected with your understanding of what the core problem is, which is why I like the sheet that we have, because it goes straight from the assessment to the action and is linked to it. And finally, I think if in your heart you don't believe that all children can learn, all of this is a waste. So as you go for coffee, please remember Land's red dotted line. I like to summarize. I've been a teacher before because, I could have said many things and it didn't stick. Remember Land's dotted line. That's the red dotted line. It's not just a crisis. According to me, it's the end of the world. And it's not enough to say we need to do something about it. If we don't do, there's no point in doing anything about education. SDGs are all fine, they have their own place for people who are living in Washington and wherever, in New York and Paris and so on. But that SDG 4.1.1a is the only thing that matters. And it's called, can children read, can they do basic arithmetic? And the more we talk about it in those terms, the easier it will be for the world to understand. And the final thing is that we do have a special role. As a group of people who have come together voluntarily from across the world, it is our responsibility to be able to share a easy-to-do solution for this problem on some scale. Many things that need to be done don't get money. I don't know who funded the work of the map that you showed, the missionaries that went from here to there. But I think work gets done when your hand and your heart and your head are all together. So thank you.